You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 4th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Myanmar's earthquake opens up a rare opportunity for diplomacy and a ceasefire in the country's long-running civil war. But will it last beyond the crisis? After that,
President Trump is very focused on America first, but my focus is very much on Northern Ireland first, making sure that Northern Ireland issues are absolutely at the centre of the considerations.
Northern Ireland is once again caught between a British rock and a European hard place, this time because of Trump's tariffs. We'll also look at the latest market reaction, and then it is time for some culture news with Monocle's Laura Kramer. Laura, we're heading home.
That's right. It's back to my old stomping grounds, Chris, in Chicago. I'll tell you about a unique new museum that's been in the works for almost 20 years, and we have to touch on the White Lotus season finale.
Of course we do, Laura, of course. Finally, we'll check in with the organisers of a world record attempt happening this weekend in Switzerland in raclette making. What will they come up with next? All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Myanmar's military government has been generally shunned by the international community and faces a civil war that is attempting to oust it from power. And yet, a devastating earthquake in the country has offered something of a silver lining. A ceasefire has been announced in the civil war, and the head of Myanmar's junta is now engaging in rare diplomacy with a trip to Thailand for a regional summit. Well, Dr. Ronan Lee is an academic and author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide, Identity, History and Hate Speech. He joins me now. Ronan, great to have you back on the show. First off, before we get to the diplomacy, what can you tell us about the earthquake recovery? What's the latest there?
Well, it's devastating. The latest figures are that there's, I think, in excess of 3,000 people dead. There's almost 5,000 people injured. The UN tells us that 28 million people in the region are affected. I mean, that's half the population of Myanmar. It could not be a worse humanitarian situation on the ground in Myanmar. This is a country, obviously, where there's been a civil war for the last 4 years, but where we have millions of people displaced prior to the earthquake taking place. We've got half the country living in poverty before the earthquake begins. The earthquake has devastated infrastructure, so electricity's been knocked out, and this will have knock-on effects in terms of access to medicines and access to food in the coming days and weeks. It's a humanitarian catastrophe for ordinary people.
And Ronan, it is always strange to say perhaps that an earthquake and such devastation will create opportunities in diplomacy, but here we are, because it is something where neighboring countries will want to get involved or offering to Myanmar relief. So tell us about how Myanmar has reached out, whether it's reached out to its neighbors, and about this regional summit that's taking place as well.
Well, the military dictatorships learned from mistakes it made in the past. So when Cyclone Nargis devastated the country some years ago, it was wide. The military government was widely criticised for blocking access to humanitarian relief. So this time, the coup leader Min Aung Hlaing was very quick to announce that he wanted international support and that he would welcome international support. In practice, that's not quite what's happened. So obviously countries were very quick to, I mean, it's the devastation of the earthquake. Countries were very quick to offer money and to send medical relief, but there was no ceasefire on the part of the military junta. The military junta continued to use airstrikes, in fact, in the earthquake zone, and despite opposition groups suggesting the National Unity Government, for instance, the alternative government of the country, immediately called for a ceasefire, but that wasn't immediately taken up by the military junta. We've seen in the last few days Myanmar government soldiers firing on Chinese aid workers. I mean, it gives you some sense of how fraught the situation is on the ground. There's an inconsistency between the language that's been used by the military government and what they're doing on the ground.
And with that then in mind, what is the expectation from this regional summit that the junta chief is traveling to? He is going to meet with Thailand's Prime Minister, also with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Is any of that going to be more than symbolic, particularly given what you're describing on the ground in Myanmar?
I think this is a big deal for Min Aung Hlaing, the coup leader. I think this is something that he's craved international legitimacy, and he's not had it from some of the quarters that he's wanted. I mean, he's been treated internationally, certainly by the West. He's been treated as a pariah. ASEAN has not welcomed him. The Southeast Asian regional body has not welcomed him, but he has been welcomed by China and Russia. And this is the first time really that we see this is a significant regional economic body. I mean, the meetings have been attended by Narendra Modi, the prime ministers of Bangladesh and Thailand are there. This is the sort of legitimacy on the international stage that Min Aung Hlaing's been looking for, and he will sell this within Myanmar, both to ordinary people. I mean, it's all over state media today. There's pages and pages in state newspapers today about his visit, about his photo ops, about he's attended the dinner they're telling local people. But also, Min Aung Hlaing's been very strongly criticised in some quarters within the military. And this will be an opportunity for him to signal to them that he is in control of the situation and that he has taken the opportunity that the earthquake has presented. I think another issue that's worth considering is that the United States' role in response to the earthquake has not been as strong as it would have been in under previous national administrations. So the cuts to US AID have been genuinely impactful. The announcement by Trump of a very small humanitarian donation to Myanmar, I think it was about $2 million. I mean, this is less than some small European countries have donated. I think that has signalled to regional groups like the regional group that Min Aung Hlaing's meeting with in Bangkok, that the US is not overly concerned about issues regarding the legitimacy of the junta. This has been an opportunity for the military dictatorship to normalise its relations with its neighbours and to genuinely get the legitimacy internationally that it's been looking for. This is a significant diplomatic shift, I think.
Well, Ronan, just finally and quickly, we have about a minute, but in terms of India as well as another country you touched on briefly because Modi is there, but have they been filling this gap, trying to fill this gap when you describe the US leaving, not offering much help? What is India's role, and might they put some kind of pressure on Myanmar's junta as well?
No, they won't. No, China and Russia have filled the gap. They've been very quick to do that. They've welcomed. Min Aung Hlaing has visited China, I think half a dozen times since the coup. He's met with Xi. He's very recently visited Russia and met with Vladimir Putin. India's situation's a little bit different. It shares an unstable border with Myanmar. I mean, there are domestic political issues in India in terms of its relationship along. It's domestic politics in that border zone. There's been criticisms within India as well about Myanmar military's treatment of the Rohingya Muslim community. It's clear though that Modi wants to normalise relations with the military bosses in Myanmar, but he's been reluctant to be a first mover on that. And I think that Trump's actions over the last week have indicated that there'll be no downside. Diplomatically for Modi taking a greater interest in Myanmar. But the winners out of this really have been the Myanmar military, China, Russia, and the losers have been the ordinary people in Myanmar.
Ronan, thank you very much for that update. That was Dr. Ronan Lee, academic and author of Myanmar's Rohingya Genocide, Identity, History and Hate Speech. And now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. South Korea's Constitutional Court has voted to uphold the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol. The unanimous ruling ends months of political turmoil following his sudden declaration of martial law last December. Now that Yoon has been ousted, a snap election must be held within 60 days. Hundreds of thousands of fleeing Gazans have sought shelter in one of the biggest mass displacements of the war. This comes as Israeli forces advance into the city of Rafah, part of a newly announced security zone they intend to seize. At least 112 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli attacks across Gaza in the past day, including mostly women and children. And Switzerland's population has reached a record high of just over 9 million, despite its declining birth rate. In the last 25 years, the number of people living in the nation has increased by a quarter, largely due to an increase in immigration, mainly from EU countries such as Italy, Germany and Portugal. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Donald Trump's tariff announcement this week has left many countries around the world stunned by a new economic reality. But one country that has breathed a sigh of relief would be the UK, which faces the minimum 10% tariffs and a lower number than the rest of the European Union. It is being described as a Brexit dividend, but as with Brexit, there is one British territory that is stunned by that new reality. And this, as ever, is Northern Ireland, caught between the UK and the EU and unsure exactly what all this means for their companies and exports. Well, I'm joined now by Ben Kelly, Senior Audience Editor at Newsweek. Ben, great to have you on the show for this. It is a complicated thing to explain, and perhaps we can first of all go into the background of what Northern Ireland's current situation actually is from an economic perspective, because I understand it's sort of part of the European single market for goods, but also, of course, part of the UK.
Yeah, hi, Chris. Northern Ireland was given a very special circumstance after Brexit. You'll remember all those complications over trade across the border. And effectively, we got the Windsor Agreement, which gives Northern Ireland unique access to both the EU single market and also the UK market. And this was supposed to set it up for a great economic advantage. You remember Rishi Sunak calling it the most exciting economic zone in the world. That hasn't really got going, but it has sort of staved off any of the Brexit damage that might have been done to Northern Ireland. A few hiccups along the way, but now it seems with these tariffs, we could potentially be seeing some of the first divergence and real bumps in the road that separates Northern Ireland out from its partners both in the UK and the EU.
And explain those bumps in the road then for us when it comes to these US tariffs. From the US perspective, will Northern Ireland count as the UK or will it count as Europe?
Well, it's counting as the UK. What we're currently looking at is Northern Ireland being given the 10% tariff that has been slapped on the UK, whilst the Republic of Ireland is facing the 20% tariffs that are on the EU. Now, at the moment, that's fairly good news. I'm just reading different economists here this morning. David McWilliams, who's quite big in Ireland, saying that Northern Ireland's finally getting a break here. Access to the American market at half the tariff that's being placed on the Republic. Another economist saying it's the least worst situation for Northern Ireland. The fear really comes, I suppose, that advantage can obviously be exploited if things just stay as they are, but we're expecting retaliatory moves from the EU, which could then actually see Northern Ireland having to increase tariffs or facing more increased tariffs that are not being faced by the rest of the UK. If this sounds complicated, it's because it is. So I think it's a little bit too soon to say whether this is going to be a good thing for Northern Ireland or not. Certainly there's a lot of worry and fear in Belfast and a lot of calls out to London and Brussels sort of saying, please consider us when you are responding to Donald Trump.
And do we get the sense that the European Union will be considering Northern Ireland? Is there a way that Brussels might be able to take Northern Ireland's concerns into account as it calibrates its own response?
It's very hard to say that because we are but a small part of this very large jigsaw puzzle, right? I mean, when you think back to Brexit, when we had to be given this special treatment, we were a bit more important, as it were, a bit of a sticking point. But here we're just one small part of a much wider perspective thing, really. So it's hard to say where we're going to come into that. But certainly, this is not going to be good for Northern Ireland's economy if costs go up for Northern Irish businesses. And that's going to have a negative impact on everyone. But then, of course, look at this whole picture. Who is coming out of this positively? At the moment, it doesn't seem like anyone, really.
And in terms of those negatives, when you describe it for businesses, one particular example we wanted to touch on is whiskey, because it's an awkward one that I understand it's often sourced in Ireland but processed in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, I mean, this happens with so many different products, but Irish whiskey is really unique. Obviously, it's an Irish product. We're exporting it out. It's something we really want to make something of. And yet, you're absolutely right. Many of the younger whiskey businesses in Northern Ireland buy the young product from the Republic of Ireland before aging it and bottling it north of the border. Now, quite how you then label that product as to where it's come from is going to be complicated. Could you talk Donald Trump into having some sort of national whiskey rule? I don't know. But yes, it's something that obviously we're increasingly exporting to the Americans. There's 40 distilleries across all of the island. So it's a really interesting business to keep an eye on as a marker of what's going on here.
It is, and certainly something the European Union has been threatening to add tariffs to as well. Ben Kelly, thank you very much for attempting very well to unpack the complications there for us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now, for more on the tariffs and how they're impacting financial markets, it is time for a Markets Roundup with Ewan Potts, Bloomberg reporter and regular Monocle contributor. Ewan, yesterday was a wild day for the markets, basically down, but there is no sign of a let-up today, is there?
Chris, often after a big sell-off, there is a rebound. Well, no sign of that today. After yesterday's rout on the US stock market, Vice President J.D. Vance said the stock market will boom for a long time. It is certainly not booming today. European markets opened in the red and have continued heading south. The Stoxx 600 is now down 4.6%. That's the biggest move since March 2020. You remember what was in the news 5 years ago. The European benchmark has now erased all of its 2025 gains. The rally we saw at the beginning of the year as investors priced in that extra stimulus from Germany and the higher defence spending. That good news story, though, very much a distant memory. China adding to the gloom within the last hour, announcing that it is to hit back US tariffs, imposing its own 34% levy on all US imports from next week, calling Trump's plan typical unilateral bullying. Here in Europe, every major market deep in the red. Italy's FTSE MIB down 7.1%, and the IBEX in Spain down nearly 6%.
And Ewan, where is this coming from then? Why were markets so caught off guard, I suppose, that this would continue into a second day? Is it the China reaction, or where else is this continuing correction coming from?
Well, China has certainly been a factor in this. The market did sell off a lot when that came through. I think markets starting to realising that, firstly, that Trump is serious about all of this stuff. When he first announced tariffs at the beginning of the year, there was a feeling that it was a negotiating tactic, that he would put them on selectively, and then when he got small wins, he could trumpet it as a win and remove the tariffs. Well, now the market realises that he is serious about this. And actually, the words he's been saying for months and years about how he thinks that tariffs are important and a useful tool for the United States, he really means that, and he is imposing these right around the world, and this will be incredibly disruptive to global trade, and it will be incredibly disruptive to markets. And I think the response from China really making clear that when it comes to smaller countries, perhaps the US can bully its way into imposing these tariffs, but when it comes to China and the European Union, they're not going to lay back and let this just happen. So the response from China really knocking the market as well.
And Ewan, finally, a word on tech stocks, the big tech companies in particular. They've been in for the biggest wild ride out of everyone.
Yeah, yesterday's session in New York was absolutely brutal. President Trump's tariff announcement wiping $2.5 trillion from the value of US stocks. And as you mentioned, it was the tech-heavy NASDAQ, which was hardest hit, dropping more than 5.5%. On the day. Chief Executive of the Consumer Technology Association, representing the big tech companies, says, make no mistake, American consumers, families and workers will all feel real pain from these tariffs. All of the Mag 7 stocks deep in the red. Apple, one of the firms most exposed to tariff risk, given that China is a key manufacturing hub, it shed more than $300 billion in market value just in yesterday's session. Amazon tumbling 9%. It raised $200 billion in value. Another company, of course, which buys a lot of stuff from China. But the problem for these major importers like Amazon is that the tariffs apply to wherever they're buying stuff. So shifting production to, say, Vietnam is no longer a way out. So the sell-off set to continue in New York today as well. The Nasdaq futures currently down another 3%. So looking like no let-up in the session when New York opens a bit later on this morning.
Ewan Potts, thank you very much for that depressing markets news. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. Time for some more uplifting news with a culture news roundup. Laura Kramer is Monocle Radio's senior producer, joins me right here in the studio. Welcome back, Laura.
Hello, Chris. I can't promise that I won't touch on the Trump tariffs. It's a story we can't get away with.
We can't get away, but we're not going to start there.
No, let's try.
Go with something happier. We did say at the top, we're going home. We're going to your old stomping grounds. Let's start there.
Yeah, so, as you know, Chris, I lived in Chicago for 2 years. The first place in America that I lived, so it's got a very special place in my heart.
And my favorite city in the U.S.
It's such a cool city, yeah. And right now it's going to have a very unique new museum. The National Museum of Public Housing opens today in Chicago, and it's been in works for 2 decades now. And its executive director is Lisa Yoon Lee. She says it's unlike any museum that you've ever been to because it's founded, first of all, by residents. And it's the first cultural institution that interprets the American experience via public housing. Very unique concept. So because it's focusing on public housing, it's housed in the last surviving building of the Jane Addams homes built in 1937. It's in the area known as Little Italy, so a big immigrant population there. And it again showcases the history and the residents and what they went through, and it won't just be focused on Chicago, I should say, because it's going to be featuring
the National Museum.
It is a national museum. It's throughout the exhibit. You've got objects from Chicago, Houston, New York. Very cool. I wish I was there. Basically, I want to see what's happening, and I think it's at an interesting time too, as we just heard. Ewan, fears of recession. There's a lot of housing insecurity right now. Worries about what's going to happen next. So it's a very apt time to open something like this.
Good to have a spotlight on public housing. I hope you get to visit it at some stage in the future.
Definitely. Absolutely. And Little Italy, great area, especially for pizza.
In general, all the sort of areas, the sort of Polish areas and everything in Chicago. Anyway, great city. But we do have to touch on the Trump tariffs once again, because there is the culture angle to this as well, impacting international film, TV.
Absolutely, because, well, the new round of tariffs, as we know, up 50% in some countries. It is sparking concern in the global film and TV industry, because not maybe through direct tariffs, because it is a service industry. So those are services. Luckily, they are being currently protected. However, there is a fear of the broader protectionist shift that we're protectionist shift, if I can get the word out right. Of the overall mood in the U.S. about what this means, whether it could pressure U.S. companies to pull back from international productions, resist local content, regulations abroad. It is a very international community. We like to travel abroad and shoot in these different locations. I mean, the U.S. has Hollywood. You've got Atlanta, New York as big filming locations. We are shooting a lot in Canada, for example. What's going to happen with everything happening in Canada? And
absolutely. I mean, well, and we're also, we're to foreshadow our final item, I mean, we are going to be talking about filming in Thailand for White Lotus, and that in itself is an example. There's a lot of filming that's going on internationally from U.S. companies.
Yeah, absolutely. These locations are a big source of soft power for countries. Indeed, lots of countries are pushing for it. So, I know Spain, for example, is looking to expand its global profile as a filming location, as is Singapore. Of course, Thailand, which we'll discuss. Prague and Budapest, big locations for popular locations, not just because of the architecture, so the sense of history, but there are also lower costs usually involved with filming in these other locations. It'll be interesting to see whether this opens the door for companies, for the likes of like the UK, to do more there. So kind of fill in the gap that the US, usually had, or indeed what this will also mean for Hollywood, where Donald Trump hasn't traditionally been a very popular guy. But if it's bringing more
probably mutual.
Yeah, exactly. But if it's bringing more business back home, will that shift? It's interesting to see what's happening. So everybody is on knife's edge waiting to see how this will impact the wider industry.
It is very interesting, but this is also a good segue into our final item because it is the finale, if I can get that word out.
It's Friday, Chris. The drinks haven't started yet.
No, they'll start a bit later. But we are talking about White Lotus. It is the finale. I understand it's going to be the longest ever finale. There's a lot still to unpack and explain in terms of what's going to happen with this thing.
You're right. It's going to be 90 minutes. Everybody's very excited because we're going to finally figure out, as everybody knows, White Lotus starts at the beginning of every season with a death. We don't know who it is, and then it's revealed in the last episode. So we're very exciting. We're all anticipating what's going to happen. It's been such a source of bonding here at Monocle, too.
There's been a lot of water cooler chat, as it were, in terms of what we think are happening. Theories. Do you have your own theories? We're not going to do spoilers, of course. Well, we can't do spoilers. It hasn't come yet. But what have you been thinking ahead of this weekend? What are you expecting? And is everybody ever right, or is everyone always wrong?
There's so much speculation. So much has happened of this show that nobody knows what to expect. But one of the cast members actually has said recently that people will hate Mike White after, which he's the creator and director of the series, the writer. She's saying that they're going to hate him after the finale, which makes me worried. What's going to happen? Is it going to be one of the characters that I love? I don't know. He's saying that he thinks it's going to really complete it, and he hopes it'll make people sad, but in a good way. Foreshadowing. I don't know. What does that mean?
Good thing, sad in a good way?
I don't know. So let me tell you, though, you know who's all watching it. Fernando and myself, obviously. Tom Webb, he does not like speculation. He has cut me off a few times. Andrew Tuck is across it, as well as is Tom Edwards, head of radio.
They're both into speculation?
I think Tom Edwards really enjoys a good gossip, so, which is I think that at the bottom of it, what this show is really about. We're nosy people, we're journalists, and it's a show that kind of really gives us a chance to do that, to get into the messy lives of other people.
There's going to be an explosion of gossip on Monday. Is that fair to say, Laura? Well, not gossip at that point, just like what happened.
Yeah, we'll be unpacking how it goes, but I think the reason the show has really touched so many people is it encompasses many things that we love, which is escapism, obviously the high quality production, which we spoke about before. It's social commentary, it's sex, it's wealth, privilege, and all that with great humor and this wonderful writing coming from Mike White. Very excited for it.
Anyone who wants to catch up before the weekend, do it now before the finale is arriving. Laura Kramer, thank you very much for joining us here on Monocle Radio. This is The Briefing. The deliciously cheesy raclette is something of a national pastime for the Swiss, certainly associated with Switzerland around the world, which is why after France claimed the world record for a single raclette gathering, the people of the Swiss town of Valais said non, merci, because yes, this is the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and got to work. Now tomorrow, with nearly 5,000 guests and over a ton of cheese, they are ready to melt that record back into Swiss hands. And joining me now is Soraya Genoux, the event manager of My Expo and the project manager of the World Raclette Record. Soraya, great to have you on the show with us. Thank you for taking some time before this incredibly busy day that you're going to have tomorrow. Just walk us through, first of all, exactly what is going to happen.
Hello. So, as you say, we are organizing the Raclette World Record here in Martigny tomorrow, and we will be welcoming 4,848 guests to beat this record.
That is a big number. What does it take to organize such a big number? I also understand that you got that number pretty much in the first hour or so of advertising this event.
Yeah, it was really crazy. So the tickets were sold in just more than 1 hour. So people were really, really motivated to show the French that raclette belongs to Switzerland and not to France.
And why does the raclette resonate so strongly with people across Switzerland? What made this such an important thing to retake?
I think it's really part of our tradition here in Switzerland. It's a meal that we share with family, friends, from various occasions, from wedding to anniversary to just a normal Sunday. And I think raclette, really is a part of Switzerland. And most of all, we have the tradition of the cheese scraper that the French did not have. It's the person who is in charge of melting the cheese. And that is really also a part of our tradition. And we are learning since children to the art of scraping the cheese.
So how many people are you going to have in that role? Because obviously with nearly 5,000 guests, there can't be one person in charge of melting the cheese. You have 275 raclette ovens at work tomorrow.
It's more than that. We have 315 different ones.
That is a lot of ovens. How does this work? Who's going to man all these ovens?
So every scrapper did manage to bring us the oven last week, and today we're trying to put them on every different oven to see, first of all, if everything works. And then tomorrow, everyone comes behind the oven and they just scrap the cheese until the end of the event.
The people who will be bringing their ovens and being in charge of making the cheese, where did they come from? Are they sort of the people who are in charge, as it were, in their own families for making raclette?
Yeah, I think most of the people who are here are volunteers, and they are the scrapper of the family, most of all. And it's really important to them to be there to the world record. A lot of them have told us, it's maybe the only world record we ever done, and it's for raclette. It's really crazy.
And what do you hope people will remember from this evening tomorrow most? Is it about the record? Is it about the raclette? Or are you also hoping this would just be a very fun, very Swiss atmosphere?
It will be really, really Swiss, that's for sure. But the atmosphere will be really friendly. We have musical entertainment. We have different brass bands. We will have a DJ. I think the atmosphere will be very cool. And I think it's for most of the people, it will be the only world record they will ever done. So it's crazy to have it here in Martinique.
And just finally, Soraya, how confident are you that you will break this world record tomorrow? There will be a notary on hand just to make sure that everything goes according to plan.
Yes, so it will be really easy, I think, because we already have more people than in France. So we are really, really confident, but we are just hoping that the event goes well and people will be happy.
Soraya Genoux, event manager at My Expo, thank you for joining us. Good luck tomorrow. You sound extremely confident. That is all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis and Desiree Bandley. Our researcher was Francesca Jokes, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, have a good weekend, and thanks for listening.